Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent here on News Central Television with me, Gbenga Aborowa. This is the show where we bring you all the latest updates on security happenings across the continent of Africa. But before we delve into today's discussion, let me first bring you the major security headlines around the continent. Abducted Anglican driver and wife regain freedom in Nigeria. Troops capture Islamic State group leader Al-Bakaye in Mali. And anti-Rwandan tensions intensify in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And finally, Nigerian army rescues abducted Chibok girl in Borno State. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Now, the death toll from a massacre by suspected jihadists in northern Burkina Faso last weekend has risen to 79. The attack unfolded on Saturday night in the village of Setienga. It came 2 days after jihadist attack on government forces that prompted an army offensive against the militants. On Monday, the country began 3 days of mourning following the bloodshed. The attack is the deadliest since the military seized power in January over frustrations at failures to stem Burkina Faso's years-long jihadist insurgency. We have more details for you in this package.
Rich with resources and opportunities, vast in size and extensive in reach, the Sahel is now as dangerous as it is beautiful. The Sahel region of Africa includes from west to east parts of northern Senegal, southern Mauritania, central Mali, northern Burkina Faso, the extreme south of Algeria, Niger, the extreme north of Nigeria, Cameroon and Central African Republic, central Chad, central and southern Sudan, the extreme north of South Sudan, Eritrea and Ethiopia. Spanning more than 3 million square kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Red Sea in the east, the region, which varies from several hundreds to thousands of kilometers in width, has now become known as a hideout for terrorists and jihadist organizations. Violence is becoming a regular occurrence for many of those who call the Sahel home, as various groups battle for control of the region and also use it as a base for which to launch attacks against the militaries and different countries and against communities in the area. Burkina Faso is one of the resource-rich yet troubled countries in the Sahel. Its problems offer a glimpse into the struggles of the region. Burkina Faso's story is an example of the entire region's struggle to attain peace. More than 1.8 million Burkinabés, nearly 10% of the country's entire population, are internally displaced. 15% of the population is also facing food insecurity. Burkina Faso has one of the largest deteriorations of peace in the world and fell 12 places in the latest Global Peace Index. A country that has the potential for greatness is now seemingly at the center of the violence and extremism rampaging across the Sahel.
You're watching Secure the Continent on News Central Television. We'll go on a quick break, and when we come back, we will be introducing the panel to you and we'll get straight into our discussion. You're welcome back to Secure the Continent. Today on the program, we will be looking at the security situation in Burkina Faso. Is Burkina Faso fast becoming the epicenter of the Sahel's security crisis? And joining me this evening to discuss these and more, Koalaga Oumarou Paul, Executive Director of the Institut de Stratégie et des Relations Internationales, ISRI. I also have Fahiraman Rodrigue Koné, is the research is a senior researcher at the Sahel program at the Institute of Security Studies, and Paul Melly, consultant fellow, Africa program at Chatham House, joins in live from London in the United Kingdom. Gentlemen, welcome to Secure the Continent.
Thank you.
A pleasure to be with you.
I would like to start with Koalaga. Can I start by asking you to give us a context and background to how we got here in the first place? How did Burkina Faso go from being spared most of the jihadist attacks in the Sahel to the epicenter in less than a decade?
Okay, let's say that Burkina Faso today is in a situation that is worsening. Because we know that we have been, we're experiencing these terrorist attacks since 2015, and we try more or less to, let's say, counter, these violent extremists, not only inside the country, but also contributing, with the others, troops that are in Mali, Nigeria, in the G5 Sahel, we have tried a lot with the contribution with the national forces, but let's say that just to remind that at the beginning we're not, let's say, familiar with this sort of phenomena, but with time going and with the different, let's say, resources that are put together with, the support of international organization and with, some countries and our partners, mainly with France, we have succeeded in trying to reverse, the situation. But with time going on, we have noticed that, by these past 2 years, things are becoming, very, serious, and many civilians now are killed instead of, going, and fighting against, national forces. When the national forces, succeeded in, let's say, having, or killing, the violent extremists, civilians are now, the targets of this violent extremist group. Now, the change that, operated in January, 2022 with, the junta that's, arrived in power, things were, let's say, from the explanation, they were there to just, make things change because they were saying that they did not have enough resources from the state. But unfortunately, on the ground, we can experience that, things are not, let's say, bettering, and things are becoming more and more serious.
Hold your thoughts there, Koalaga. I'd like to bring in Paul at this point, and it's good that you mentioned that the soldiers, the militant soldiers that ousted Burkina Faso's democratically elected president, Oumarou Kabore, earlier this year vowed they will do a better job at stopping the jihadist violence rocking Burkina Faso. 5 months later, we're witnessing a surge in the violence. The security situation seems to be worse than what it was under the ousted president. Paul, why is this so?
Well, I think you have to separate, if you like, the reasons why the security situation may be worse from the performance of the current government, or indeed the one before. The reason that the security situation is worse is because of the huge scale of the Sahel crisis. It's gone from a situation where you had some armed groups ideologically motivated, staging, if you like, a series of quite targeted attacks, into a much more generalized sense of insecurity, social instability, disruption of the local economy in many rural areas of the Sahel, and a real test, almost a breakdown in some cases, of the normal rural economy and development model. There was an attack at Solan in Burkina Faso about a year ago, and I attended a briefing where people were talking about, witnesses from the attack were talking about what they had seen. And one of the most striking things they pointed out was that most of the attackers were young teenage boys. So these were not jihadist ideologues. These were, if you like, young kids who had got caught up in a generalized disintegration of stability and almost without a clear motive. The attack was almost senseless in the way it was carried out. And so that's the scale of the crisis that Burkina Faso is facing. It isn't, I think, really very surprising that the current government, the military-led government that took power in January, has had no more success than the previous government in tackling this huge scale of crisis. It isn't really simple, although people complained that President Kabore, the democratically elected head of state who was forced out of office in January, some people complained that he had poor relations with the army. Some people felt that he needed to strengthen the provision of resources and that he needed to overhaul strategy. Fundamentally, you couldn't assume that just because he was forced out of office, that in the very short term, this would produce a major sort of step change, if you like, in the success rate of the military, because the military is still the Burkina Faso army and the other forces of the state, such as the gendarmerie and so on, who are trying to tackle this problem. And Burkina Faso hasn't suddenly been able to mobilize massively more resources. There is, as the previous guest pointed out, there is a partnership, a military partnership with France, which was something that President Kabore had launched shortly before leaving power, and that has achieved some limited successes. But this is a huge crisis that can't be solved in the very short term. It would be a real surprise to see a dramatic improvement in circumstances. And in some ways, the attacks, and this is just my concluding point here, the attacks that we've seen recently, the attack on the village of Setanga, which I think claimed 79 lives in the last few days.
Yes.
And before that, the attack on the mine, the gold mine, the Karma gold mine. In the conditions that prevail in northern Burkina Faso, where the militants moving around very rapidly by motorbike, they have the capacity to stage attacks with great surprise, and they're operating with great ferocity. It isn't surprising when these attacks happen. It's not going to be a simple task to develop some sort of strategy that restores the underlying stability and cohesion of society and draws those alienated young men who've joined the armed groups, draws them back into peaceful existence. That's going to take a very long time.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Koalaga, who are these groups responsible for the attacks on government forces and civilians in Burkina Faso? And do these jihadist groups enjoy support from the local population?
Yeah, we know that, for so far, they have not, let's say, claimed, the attacks. But, seeing or analyzing the way they are operating, we know that in the region, international extremist groups are, Al-Qaeda and AGS, that is in French, État Islamique au Grand Sahara, and the Jenim. But, seeing, the way it has been operated without, claiming, we can say that this is seems to be AGS, that is the Al-Qaeda in the Sahara area. And let's say they are also supported by, the local, operators, some that are in Burkina and supporting, what these, what I can qualify as international groups are doing. Because we know that at the beginning, there were more people coming from outside, but since, let's say, from 2 or 4 years now, we have nationals, belonging, people belonging to the country that are being transformed into jihadists and supporting with, to operate in such a way.
So what's the motivation for local Burkinabes to join these sort of groups? Are there underlying grievances? Are there disagreements with the central government in Ouagadougou? What's the drive?
Yeah, generally, people, we know that it started with, the northern part of Burkina, with, without speaking exceptionally, with ethnicity, but this has something to do. We know that there are many windows, many motivations, some are ideologically motivated, but some are, let's say, based on the grievance, economic. Some, for example, maybe expressing frustration because not being taken into account, by the government. It seems that Burkina Faso is not, let's say, offering the same chances to all the nationals. Some thinks that those that are in Ouagadougou and around are, let's say, more taken into account by the government than those that are in the remote areas. And these are some of, the grievances that these extremist groups can use. And in return, they were, let's say, for some of them, bringing them support and trying, to help them, satisfying the basic needs. And in addition to that, we know that these aspects of, as I was speaking about ideology, it's also motivated because some are very convinced that they are defending, an ideology, but also their religions, from what have been said to these people, that their religion is attacked. So it is a sort of mixture of many motivation, some economically. When you take, for example, the youth, generally some youth, let's say after, the studies, they have no, opportunity, better opportunities. And sometimes in return are offered, some opportunity, and even they receive money from these groups. And these are some of, the explanation that we can give. So it's in sum, is a mixture of many motivation, economically, politically, but also ideologically motivated.
Thank you, Koalaga. Now, Paul, what did Blaise Compaoré do differently? Because the problems in neighboring Mali were there while he was president. He was president for 27 years, and Burkina Faso suffered little or no attacks while he was president. What was in the security apparatus that made Burkina Faso immune from these attacks, or was the jihadist threat in neighboring countries not big enough then?
Well, the jihadist threat in neighboring countries was a bit less, but the other thing that is widely rumored, and I don't think it's ever been confirmed, but it was widely perceived that the Compaoré regime maintained a sort of dialogue, if you like, with the Mali-based jihadist groups. And so there was a perception that the jihadists, leading figures in the other armed groups in the north of Mali could use Ouagadougou, if you like, as a sort of safe haven, as neutral terrain. There was a perception that some of them used to come regularly to Ouaga, might even have property there, and so on. And that in return, as it were, Burkina didn't put pressure on them, and in return, they kept their groups away from attacking Burkina Faso itself. Now, this is the accusation, if you like, the rumor that is always put around about the Compaoré regime. It's never really been convincingly refuted, but there hasn't necessarily been really concrete proof. I think another factor was that we were at an earlier stage in the development of the regional crisis. So although in Burkina Faso, we did see later the emergence of an indigenously rooted jihadist group, Ansarul Islam, which then itself suffered its own crisis and saw its fighters drift away to Islamic State, EIGS, and to JNIM, both of these, the big jihadist groups in Mali. Although that happened later on, really during the Compaoré era, the jihadist activity was mostly concentrated in Mali. And it's worth remembering that there was also Tuareg separatism in north of Mali around 2011. And that, as it were, the jihadists, if you like, they exploited that situation. Although the separatists quite quickly ended up reaching a settlement, first a truce with the Malian government in 2013, and then later a peace agreement 2 years later, there was a period of instability which was specific to Mali, if you like, that the jihadists had been able to exploit and really sink their roots So even after the intervention by the French force, Barkhane, well, Serval as it was called at the time, later renamed Barkhane, but the intervention of several thousand French troops and troops from other West African countries, which ended the jihadist control of towns in Mali, it was never possible, even with those military interventions, to prevent the jihadist groups, as it were, retaining hiding places in the desert and in the Sahelian bush. And then from there, once the Compaoré regime had gone, they were able to move into Burkina. And I think there's one final factor which is worth mentioning, which is that regardless of whatever the truth about these rumors about some understanding that the Compaoré regime might have had with the jihadists, the regime did have a quite strong security apparatus and military apparatus, but particularly a security and intelligence apparatus. And this was headed by a guy called General Gilbert Diendéré, and he was a Compaoré loyalist. And the year after Compaoré was overthrown by a people power democratic revolution in 2014, and the next year, Diendéré ended up as the leader of a comeback coup attempt. Now, that failed, and he was arrested. And so, if you like, as people might say in French, the tête pensante, the sort of thinking head of the Burkina Faso security structure, quite a lot of people had disintegrated because it was so associated with the Compaoré regime that when Burkina Faso moved to sort of full post-revolution, proper democracy, part of that security apparatus had gone, and it's been very difficult to rebuild the whole intelligence structure. And when you're dealing with a guerrilla conflict, armed groups that move rapidly through the landscape, it's not just a question of weapons and force. You actually need really good intelligence on what they're doing. And that Burkina Faso has really had to try and rebuild its intelligence structures since the democratic revolution. And that's been quite a difficult task, as it inevitably would be, because it was so associated with Compaoré and his inner circle.
Okay, it's a fine place to leave it before we go on a break. When we come back, we will be looking at the government's response to these attacks and preferring solutions. You're watching Secure the Continent on News Central Television. We'll be right back after this break. You're welcome back to Secure the Continent here on News Central Television. In the first half of the show, we still have Koalaga Oumarou Paul with us here, and we had Paul Melly, consultant fellow at the African program at Chatham House. I'd like to welcome senior researchers, Sahel program at the Institute of Security Studies, Fahiraman Rodrigue Koné. It joins us live from the Malian capital, Bamako. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for staying with us. Now, I'd like to start with you, Fahiraman. According to the United Nations, attacks have increased fivefold in Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger since 2016, with more than 4,000 deaths reported last year in the border areas between the three hardest hit countries. France has deployed 4,500 troops to Operation Barkhane, and as we all know, they've gradually left the country. My question to you is, all this militaries fighting jihadist insurgency in Mali, Task Force Takuba, Barkhane, and let's not forget the G5 Sahel Task Force. Why have they failed to stop this jihadists? And as the withdrawal of French troops from Mali contributed to a spike in violence that we are now witnessing in Burkina Faso?
Yes, at the first sight, when people are talking about all the investment, military investment made by the international community in the Sahel region, they tend to forget that the Sahel region is a very, very huge space. Even if you were talking, there was like 15,000, I think 5,000 soldiers in the Sahel, in the Barkhane operation. But all these soldiers are not sufficient for all this huge geographical space. But that being said, we can say that there was some, I can say, strategical and tactical mistake that have been done by all these military intervention.
And what would you say the mistake is, Fahiraman?
First, strategically, military intervention has been over-evaluated as the end of the fight against the terrorists instead of being considered as a mean. If the military response is necessary, it is a mistake to consider it as the absolute weapon to solve this crisis, which has become very complex because it has communicating with local grievances, and I think the previous colleague have made a good drawing of the situation. So the military solution, the focus on military solution was not, I think, at my view, the best way of operating. Secondly, instead of reinforcing and supporting local armies to take the leadership, the French army, for example, in particular, has remained at the first line of the fighting of the threat. This was a mistake because this army, even if they have enormous military resources, it doesn't have the sociological knowledge of the context. And also, I think the response was too focused on the intervention urgencies instead of preventive approach. So all those mistakes, I think, was linked to the way how they consider the priorities of the intervention.
Thank you, Fahiraman. Now I'd like to bring in Koalaga here. Koalaga, Fahiraman just painted a picture of why the operations have failed so far. He says the focus has been too kinetic, more focus on a military solution in dealing with this insurgency. My question to you is this: what is the Burkina Faso government doing to address a long-standing grievances that fuel this insurgency that you did mention a few earlier? And is the government of Burkina Faso ready? Are they ready to negotiate with this armed groups to find a negotiated settlement to this conflict? Are they ready and are they willing? Yes.
Yeah. Let's say that before that, I fully agree with what the colleague from Mali had just pointed out as challenges and all these, mistakes that that was committed and giving us, where we are now. To the government of Burkina Faso is fully aware of these challenges that were done and focusing everything on the security issues. Now, recently and even before, with the former regime, the idea of, let's say, engaging negotiation with, this extremist group was, let's say, officially rejected when that, was, coming from, the opinion. The government was also always saying that they were not ready to negotiate with these people. But with the new regime, with the military, and now there is, a sort of progress in this idea of engaging negotiation with these extremist group. But what they were saying, the idea is they are not negotiating directly with, the leader of this extremist group, but, engaging and finding some space of negotiation that we call dialogue with some of the nationals that were in these groups, and then now let's say we're expecting to find better issues, and now they have come to the conclusion that they cannot succeed in engaging and in killing, let's say, the national of their countries. So some of them, let's say, approaches, some of the religious and traditional leaders and wanted, let's say, to come back. And then the government has taken advantage of this situation and decided since, let's say now 1 month, to set up some space of dialogue with these people. And the thing that when opening, the dialogue with these, let's say Burkinabes that were engaged in this movement, they can succeed somewhere, to, reduce the numbers of, let's say, attacks. This is one point, but also trying to give chance, to these people to come back to, to the normal situation that is, leaving this extremist group. But now the challenge is, are these people that were, let's say, claiming to or just would like to come back, are they really sincere? Will they really engage fully in this dialogue if it is?
And would they keep to any agreement if an agreement is reached at the end of the day? Yes.
Yeah. But if not, then it may be a challenge. But this space is present, is engaged, but the military issues is also something that is still on the ground. But unfortunately, these recent days and weeks, the situation is now very worse, and they have to find new strategies. They have to find new approaches just to reverse the trend that is not good, because today the government and the army particularly were, let's say, communicating, trying to give some figures that were, let's say, giving some optimistic view to inside the population. But what's happened these days is coming as something that let's say making the thing becoming very difficult. And now in Burkina, the opinion generally and the population are not really self-confident about what the government is saying.
Yes.
For some of them, they think that the government is sometimes not telling necessarily the truth.
The government definitely needs to do something about that situation. Thank you, Koalaga. I'd like to bring in Fahiraman. Now, according to a recent UN report, almost 1 in every 4 people in Burkina Faso, a country of 20 million, need urgent humanitarian assistance. What are some of the humanitarian effects of this conflict on the people of Burkina Faso? We've seen a spike in violence recently, lots of people displaced, like Koalaga just said. It's not a pretty picture. Even members of the armed forces of Burkina Faso, their morale is dropping because every other week they're losing colleagues and men.
Yeah, I think the situation is really worrying. People don't take enough, don't have enough concern about the situation in Burkina Faso, but there is a serious humanitarian crisis. Now, with the last attack of Seitenga, we are beyond 2 million IDPs, and more than 3,000 schools have been closed. Also, community hospitals, and that it is really a dramatic situation with comment. But if you put this also in the geography and the climate situation now, there is also bad figures, which has a bad figure on the harvest, the next harvest. So it means that the situation, the humanitarian situation, is becoming very severe, and there is the urgent need that the government, but also the international community, have to mobilize to support Burkina Faso. And this humanitarian crisis, we mustn't forget that I can say the social anger against the regime of Roch Kaboré was linking to this security narrative. And because of this humanitarian crisis, this fed also the motivation of the coup. So if we don't we don't act now, the probability that there will be a next coup in Burkina Faso is very high. So the humanitarian situation could become another factor which will worsen the political instability.
Thank you very much, Fahiraman. Now, Koalaga, the current ruling junta of Lieutenant Colonel Paul Damiba has asked Burkinabés to be patient with his government and give them till September. Do you think between now and September a lot can be done? And my second question is this. We often talk about African solutions to African problems. What are regional bodies like ECOWAS and continental bodies like African Union doing to address this conflict in Burkina Faso? Or are they just overwhelmed with bigger conflicts in different parts of the continent?
Okay, for the first question, by September, it's very close. And as, Mr. Koné was just saying, the humanitarian crisis added to, the security crisis, now two different challenges that we are experiencing in Burkina Faso. What we are, when we're listening to people, let's say in the street and in the opinion, generally speaking, they were, let's say, at the beginning when the junta, took power, they were very optimistic. But now, from the different, situation that is happening these days, they lost, confidence. As I said it earlier, they lost confidence in the government, and even inside, let's say, the army, the impression that we have, we don't really, from the beginning to now, there is not a sort of, solidarity. Just to back up this argument, 3 days ago, the gendarmerie was just the one that is at the head of the gendarmerie during a ceremony, asked the spokesman of the government to go and ask the prime minister the prime minister and the president himself to give enough resources and means to his people to go and fight because they are losing many of the men. This is just to give a picture of what is happening even inside the army, and the probability that the group that is actually in power and those that were, let's say, frustrated and that were, let's say, a little bit, put, aside, because we know that when these young, let's say, junta arrive, some of the former, let's say, that was the hierarchy, some of them have been, let's say, I would not say rejected, but they have no specific, let's say, task, to be performed. And we know that they are not very happy. And this is one issue that is, let's say, we are worrying about. Now, for the international community, what they are doing, as we said at the very beginning with G5 Sahel, they have tried, but we have seen, let's say, the challenges and the shortcoming of what, we have experienced the cooperation. One of the issue being, the financial resources and the lack of trust between these international partners and the countries, because sometimes, the issue is, they would like to give,
like what we witnessed in Mali.
Yeah, yes, of course. This is one challenge. And now with ECOWAS, we know that ECOWAS is, let's say, supporting the initiative, but, since in the region, specifically with Mali, Niger, with Burkina Faso, there were sort of, let's say, these initiatives that were, let's say, having the lead. ECOWAS was, let's say, I would say, at the back and supporting. But there is another last intervention. There was another initiative that is now taking, the lead, the initiative of Accra, where the others, countries like Benin, Togo, and Cote d'Ivoire, that at the very beginning were, let's say, feeling not, concerned by the issue, now that they see that, there were some attacks in Togo and Melly.
It's
now
moving towards the coastal states of West Africa.
Yes, coastal state now. So there is an initiative, and this initiative tends, let's say, also, after, because G5 side is still, present, but with, Mali withdrawing, maybe this initiative will, let's say, take, the lead in the coming month, just to see how, with this experience acquired by Burkina and Niger, and let's say with the other country, how they can just, rebuild, a sort of a new cooperation, just to bring, other, solution to the issue.
So there's quite a lot for African countries to do when it comes to cooperation in tackling this. Now, I'd like to bring in Fahiraman. Just before we go, quickly, the level of conflict between different groups in the region is on the rise. This is according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, ACLED. The chances are high, that is, this trend will intensify in years to come. My question to you is this: is there any hope for reversing this current situation we're witnessing in Burkina Faso in the Sahel? And what needs to be done urgently?
Unfortunately, we cannot expect a reverse in the, I can say, in the following month of the worsening situation we are seeing. You were talking about the expansion on the coastal states, and what's the trend we are looking is very worrying now. And when you see also the response of the state, we have not at the level that we have very solid national armies, and also genuine, I can say, joint cooperation between all the West African states to tackle this threat. We are in history seconds where the response has been, I could say, destabilized by the withdrawal of French and European troops. And now there is the need that ECOWAS, AU, and African forces have to build a good response to be at the first line. And this should be, there is an urgency to do so. And it needs also necessity to mobilize financial means, logistical means. So this will take a long time. And also, it will be important to go beyond this military solution and seeing the political, because the political response is very important. When I speak about political response, I mean dialogue with extremist groups, but also political action of the state. The origins of the recruitment of those groups is linked to diverse situations. People enter in those groups because of frustration, because the state is absent. There is no sufficient basic need in policing, public policies. So there is the need for development. There is a need for socio-economic solution. So it means that only one country can't solve this problem, this worrying trend.
There has to be a collective response and approach.
Yes,
I'm afraid we're out of time, and this is where we'll drop the anchor on today's show. I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Koalaga Oumarou Paul, Executive Director of the Institut de Stratégie et de Relations International. Thank you very much for being a part of the show. Fahiraman Rodrigue Koné, Senior Researcher, Sahel Program at the Institute of Security Studies. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to Paul Melly, Consultant Fellow, Africa Program at Chatham House. Gentlemen, your contributions are valuable and appreciated. Thanks for being a part of the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, the government's largely military response, including the use of self-defense groups over which it exercises limited control, has often led to abuses and pushes those targeted into jihadist arms and develops a more integrated approach to security. In the longer term, resolving land disputes often drives local conflicts it should be a priority in tackling the crisis in the Burkina countryside. Until next time, remember to stay safe. I am Gbenga Aborowa. Thanks for being a part of the program. Bye-bye.